The Shatters Rehearsal event is back. I never thought I'd be saying that, but here we are. So the Shatters Rehearsal event was an event that took place toward the end of 2022, and it was kind of a disaster. So much so that I made a video about it and all the problems I had with it. I did believe that the event had potential, but it wasn't met. So I thought I'd compare the new Shatters Rehearsal to the old Shatters Rehearsal and see if they've improved it and fixed all the issues that I had with the event, because of course, my opinion on it is the most important one, nobody else's. The original Shatters Rehearsal was divided into 3 parts. There was the Shatters Rehearsal itself, random side events, and the Shattered Leaderboards. This time, the Shattered Leaderboards are completely gone, which is probably for the best. That was one of my biggest problems with the old event, was that the Shatters Leaderboards meant that people who wanted to participate in leaderboards, namely in-game players who already knew how to do Shatters, had no reason to go into the Shatters Rehearsals. In fact, they were discouraged from doing it, since they might lose their leaderboard position. Now that that's no longer the case, in-game players are free to go into the Shatters Rehearsals if they want and not feel bad about it. There is a 1.5 times XP and loot event in the regular Shatters, but I don't think that's too big of a deal, since that comes all the time. People who want to do rehearsals, or people who are going to do rehearsals, are going to do them, since those don't come back nearly as much as Shatters events do. And people who don't care about rehearsals and never were going to care about rehearsals, they'll do the Shatters event that's up. So it's probably about the best we could hope for, though they could have put tokens into the Shatters Rehearsal to encourage people doing that a little bit, and they did at the start. There was a token in the rehearsal dungeons that dropped only for Crucible characters and exclusively in the rehearsal dungeons, but after about a day they put it in the regular Shatters too, so that was no longer an incentive for the in-game players, at least. The other 2 parts of the old Shatters Rehearsal event, the random side events and the Shatters Rehearsal itself, have sort of been merged together. There's now one chest event that's going. Currently it's in Mountain Temple, and then during week 2, it'll be in the Sulphurous Wetlands. This chest event has a chance to drop all 3 of the rehearsal keys, as well as a regular Shatters key, and it's at a pretty reasonable rate. In fact, it's actually at a very high rate. This does mean that the monuments from the old Shatters Rehearsal don't spawn in the realm. I do feel like the monuments being removed does take away from the grand feeling of this event. It doesn't feel like nearly as big a deal as it did back then, because there's nothing spawning in the realm. There's no big exclusive event to drop the Shatters Rehearsal. It's just the keys from the chest event, which leads to what I've noticed. People will run the chest event to do the chest event. They'll get the keys, but they don't want to run the Shatters Rehearsal because they don't care about Shatters, or any of the drops in Shatters Rehearsal, or any of the events in Shatters Rehearsal, or regular Shatters for that matter. So they'll just open the keys right then and there, or maybe they'll just hoard them, save them for a group. And that means you can't really get organic runs of the Shatters Rehearsal in the realms. Of course, that's partially because Mountain Temple's pretty rare as well. Maybe when the Sulphurous Wetlands event comes up, you'll be able to find those in the realm, which they're common nowadays. But there's still not really much of an incentive to do the Shatters Rehearsal, aside from the rehearsal items, which are worse than the regular variants in every single way, which means no one really wants them except hardcore collectors who just want to get them because they're kind of rare. So how this event has been playing out currently is that in-game players are doing Shatters like all expected, except for the ones who want to collect the Shatters Rehearsal items. They go to the Nexus popping server, which is US East. They wait for Mountain Temples, and then they do the Mountain Temple. Some random person will open a rehearsal key. They'll go probably solo it or do it with a couple people, and they'll get their chances at the collectible rehearsal items. But there's no focus on the Shatters Rehearsal, since the Crucible tokens drop from regular Shatters as well as the Shatters Rehearsal. Of course, some people won't be able to do the Shatters, but will be able to do the Shatters Rehearsals. So there's kind of a small grit demographic there, but most people who aren't able to do Shatters probably aren't too bothered about missing a pet skin, which is the only thing you can get with the Crucible tokens. Maybe there'll be more quests during the second week. But there is another problem with the event, which is the Crucible tokens. They're exclusive to Crucible. I don't think people know that Crucible exists. It's been around for a while, but I still see people who have no idea how to activate Crucible. The statue in the Nexus is kind of out of the way and hard to spot, blends in with the players. I really just wish they'd move it to where the Alchemist is, because then people could actually find it and run it regularly. Or at least more regularly than they do now. It's still the Crucible, so it's more difficult, more challenging. Most people won't want to be bothered with that, but at least they'll know about it. That's good. The Crucible tokens weren't even mentioned in the announcement for the Rehearsal 2 event. Then there's the rehearsal itself. It's just not very rewarding to most people. It does drop potions, but not any potions that you wouldn't see in an epic dungeon like a Woodland Labyrinth or a Crawling Depths. So nobody's really going to do it for those. And then aside from the potions, there's just the rehearsal drops, which, because they're objectively worse versions of existing items, They just feel completely worthless to anyone who isn't specifically looking for rare drops to collect. In fact, the weapons especially have shot patterns comparable to mid-game items, like the Thurgy wand, for example, that drops from Janice the Door Warden. I compared this directly with the Rehearsal Dusky Catalyst on my seasonal character, and they seem to be about the same, meaning that the Dusky Catalyst isn't going to be worth using at all with the proc effect that makes it a bit worse. Nobody's going to want to do it for the items because they're not very good. Nobody's really going to want to do it to learn, because if you need to learn Shatters, you can just find someone who already knows it, or join a Discord server, or even look up a guide on YouTube or something, and then you can learn it from there without having to do a dungeon that barely gives any rewards and isn't that much less difficult than the regular dungeon. There's also a bunch of online practicers for all the hard phases like Patience. So if we want to get people to run the rehearsal dungeons, we're definitely going to need to add some sort of reward to them. Well, more reward than is already there. Something for everyone that isn't just collector's items. Tiered items, wine cellar tops, maybe Lost Halls tops would be a good thing. I feel like the dungeons are a little bit too short for Lost Halls tops, but wine cellar tops definitely. Just something people can get other than the rehearsal items or potions. Or we could buff the rehearsal items to be a little bit more different from the regular variants. Of course, that kind of takes away from them being rehearsal versions of those items, but I don't really see any other way you could make them worth getting without just making them the same stats as the regular versions. Then at that point, why do they exist? They wouldn't have to be better than the regular variants or even comparable to the regular variants. Just let them have something to set them apart. I don't know what it'd be. Maybe vitality or something. Puts an HP bonus on them even. I don't care. People seem to like HP, especially mid-game players, you know, because it helps you learn content and makes things a little less scary overall. So basically, maybe not HP, but a stat that would appeal to mid-game players, so probably defense, since a lot of mid-game dungeons benefit greatly from having defense bonuses. I'd also want the rehearsal keys to be resprited to not just look like the regular Shatters key. That definitely looks confusing when you're running the Mountain Temple event and you get 4 Shatters key drops, but all of them are actually completely different items. It doesn't look like that though. They all look the same. Here's a row of Shatters keys, except half of these are Rehearsal Kings, half of these are Rehearsal Bridge Sentinels, and only one of them is an actual Shatters key. And then for future ones, I'd also want the monuments in the realm to come back. It'd take a bit of effort, and they were kind of worthless before. You could put a chance at a rehearsal drop there or something to make it more appealing. Like, oh, you can get one of the rehearsal drops without having to put in too much effort. You just gotta clear and then fight one of these statues. You could make them do dumbed down versions of the boss's attacks. Like, I don't know, the king statue has crystals around it, the sentinel statue jumps or something, and the archmage statue does bombs. It would make them more warranted as encounters to fight in the realm. It'd also make it feel like a big event again, and it would make them feel rewarding, give a direct place for the rehearsals to drop, since if the keys drop from the chest, someone's either going to open it immediately because they don't care, or save it for a group that they're confident they can do the dungeon with, rather than just open it on the spot to run with people. The key drop also being super common doesn't help too much. Like, obviously it's better than it being terribly rare, but when it's common like that, you're not going to value the key at all. You're not going to value entering the dungeon at all. You'll see the key opened and you'll think, well, I can just run one more mountain temple and I'll probably see the rehearsal I want opened afterwards. There's also some missions for the regular Shatters, which are kind of in the same boat as the Crucible events, where I don't think anyone who doesn't already know how to do Shatters is going to care enough about the rewards to want to learn Shatters to get them. It's just a title, a pet skin, and then a second title for Crucible characters. Actually, the first title is on the rehearsals or regular Shatters. You just have to fight the bosses. Overall, though, I'd say this event, this version of the Rehearsal 2, feels much more worthless and not interesting as the first Rehearsal did. I do really think that's just because the statues don't spawn in the realm. I know it sounds ridiculous, but having a special encounter tied to an event makes it feel like much more of a big deal than it really is. Maybe they could try that for future events, just make new encounters for some big event that happens. You could just have a really simple one. Maybe it could just be a reused one even. I guess that's what Keeper is, but they barely do Keeper because it drops so many dungeons and event whites and a bunch of other goodies. Maybe you can have multiple types of event bosses that can drop dungeons. Have one based on Cogbold Steamworks. That's the new in-game dungeon that you could do. The Cogbold Scavenger, I believe, was one of the bosses that was planned for the scrapped Steamworks Scrapyard. You could put that as a realm encounter to drop dungeons. It wouldn't have all the event whites. Maybe you could just have Keeper have some event whites, and then the Clockbolt Scavenger boss have more event whites. Both of them could drop dungeons, whatever dungeons related to whichever events are going on at the time. You could have new ones. Appetizer can drop dungeons too, why not? Then you wouldn't even have to bring back the rehearsal statues if you wanted, but I kind of liked them. They looked really neat. But I am excited to see what the future holds for the Shatters Rehearsal event. I will give them the fact that the Rehearsal Crown drops this time as well. That's pretty big. Of course, nobody cares anymore since it's been 2 years and everyone who wanted it already got it.